Life is a race. The life of a Christian is a race. That's an illustration that has been used many times down through the years in many different settings. And in fact, it is an illustration that is a biblical concept. In Acts chapter 20, for example, as he spoke to the elders of the church at Ephesus, in verse 24 of that chapter, Paul spoke of his being determined to finish his race with joy. In 1 Corinthians chapter 9 and verse 24, Paul speaks there of the need of running this race in such a way so as to win a prize at the conclusion of it. And as Paul approached the end of his own earthly race, he wrote in 2 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 7, among the final words that he wrote, he said, I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. As we who are Christians live out our lives on earth, we are all proceeding toward that same finish line that Paul was. We are running that race. And of course, the race that we run and the race that we're talking about is not a sprint. It's not a race that the gun fires and 10, 20 seconds later it's all over. No, the race that we are involved in is more like a cross-country race or a marathon. It is an endurance event, one in which there is ample time and opportunity to grow weary. And everyone does at some point. In actual races, and I can tell you this as a former competitive runner myself, but in actual races, there is no one who finishes the race who isn't wearied and fatigued before it is over. You get tired in the midst of such a race. The body wants to slow down, even to stop. And so the mind and the will have to take over and force the body to go on, despite the weariness. I have often said that distance running is as much mental as it is physical in that regard. It requires tremendous focus, especially when the weariness sets in. And certainly this is the case where the race that is the life of a Christian is concerned. In coming to Christ, we voluntarily make a commitment to running a course that the world will constantly try to lead us off of. And any of us who have been Christians for very long can attest to the fact that it becomes so wearisome at times to have to deal with the things that make finishing our course more difficult than we wish it was. For this reason, many people decide to drop out of the race and not see it through to the end. I think of what Paul said about one of his former fellow workers in the kingdom. This is also found in the book of 2 Timothy chapter 4. In 2 Timothy 4 and verse 10, Paul says there, Demas has forsaken me, having loved this present world. Demas, it seems, got tired of running, as wearisome as it can be. We don't need to do that. Despite the fact that we do get weary of dealing with the obstacles that are placed in our way, despite how much easier it might seem to just drop out of the race, we need to take heed and take note of the words of, for example, the Hebrew writer in Hebrews chapter 10 and beginning in verse 38, where he says that the just shall live by faith. But if anyone draws back, my soul has no pleasure in him. But we are not of those who draw back to perdition, but of those who believe to the saving of the soul. We are living right now in times that can be very wearisome to the disciple of Jesus Christ. The race is difficult. Fatigue and weariness sets in so easily, which means that as in a literal race, we've got to keep focused on the right things, things that will help us fight through the weariness so that we can finish the course. Most importantly, we've got to keep focused on Jesus, not just as the reward for our steadfastness, but as a reminder that we can complete this course. Because after all, nothing that we've been through exceeds, or I dare say even matches, what he went through before he finished his race on earth. Still in the book of Hebrews, a couple of chapters over, in Hebrews chapter 12, and the first couple of verses, having just in chapter 11 provided a list of others who have successfully completed their race as well, the writer goes on to say there, therefore we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Oftentimes, we will talk about looking to the finish line and seeing Jesus there and maybe have thoughts of falling into his arms and enjoying the presence of Jesus when we finish the race and using that as a motivation to keep us going toward the finish line. And that's a good thought. Don't get me wrong. It's one that I embrace as well. But what I'm getting at is not only can we take joy in knowing that we will be with him when we cross the finish line, we can also from Jesus take heart in knowing that he is there because he successfully finished the race. And of course, that was far more difficult even than anything that any of us have gone through. I've noted to the folks that I go to church with that for Jesus, coming to the earth at all was a tremendous sacrifice. If he had come to earth and been treated like an earthly king, that still would have been a huge step down for him. But when you add to that the fact that he wasn't treated like a king, his successful completion becomes even more impressive as someone who, according to Hebrews 4:15, was in all points tempted as we are, yet without sin. When the weariness sets in, look unto Jesus. Look at Jesus. Do you get weary at being reviled by those around you who care nothing for the Lord? Well, he suffered the same type of thing. I think of John chapter 10 and verse 20, when many of the Jews, upon hearing Jesus speak, said, he has a demon. Does it seem too much to you to suffer loss as a result of your commitment to the Lord? Maybe even it might seem like simply too much to be willing to do without certain things that might give us pleasure, just for the sake of serving the Lord better. Well, I noted a moment ago that what Jesus gave up in coming down to the earth from heaven is so much more than anything we could ever give up. And yet, what we find in John chapter 6 and verse 39 is it was the Father's will that he do so. So he did it. He did not shrink from the purpose for which he was sent to run this race, but he committed himself to completing it, despite what he had to give up to even start it. Have you been hurt by the abandonment of some because of your faith and your commitment to this race? I know that happens all too often to the faithful, and it is difficult to endure, don't get me wrong. It can be the source of severe temptation to drop out ourselves. Well, at the moment that Jesus was feeling the full weight of the heavy burden that was placed upon him, when his enemies were coming to take him away, take him into custody with the intent of putting him to death, at the moment when anyone would appreciate the support of a friend, Matthew chapter 10 and verse 56 says that all the disciples forsook him and fled. Jesus had plenty that could have wearied him and caused him to say, enough is enough, and just pulled out. And really, he told Peter as much just before he was arrested. Jesus could have dropped out of the race, but where would that have left us? And so, remembering his purpose, and remembering all who were depending upon him, having the fortitude and determination to finish this course that God had set before him, he endured to the very end, even declaring from the cross, it is finished, as though to say, I made it. Mission accomplished. We live in challenging times for the believer, to be sure. But one of the blessings of having Jesus as our perfect example is to remind us that the course that we are called to complete is, in fact, completable. And the prize that awaits every finisher at the end will make the difficulties of the race seem as nothing. Hang in there, Christian. Believe in Jesus. Obey Jesus. I hope you have a good day.